Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Online Business Podcast or the Brian Keane Business Podcast, depending on when you're listening. I'm your host, Brian Keane, online Irish fitness entrepreneur and business coach here to help you with all things online, health, or fitness business. Today's podcast, we are going to talk books. There's a lot of you out there who potentially are authors or aspiring authors and would love to someday write a book. And today's topic is probably going to be titled something along the lines of what I learned working with a traditional publisher and why I'll probably go self-publish next time. And I think this episode is very timely. It's been over a year since my last book came out, The Keen Edge, Mastering the Mindset for Real Lasting Fat Loss, which was my first traditionally published book. And when I think of podcast episodes that I wish I had listened to or covered before going down that road, today's episode is going to fall straight into that. So although it's probably too late for me to learn from the mistakes, although I'll make adjustments going forward, it might be perfect timing for you if you are thinking about, in the process of, or have a book that you have that's coming out soon. And with the traditional model, there's a lot of pros and cons. I'm going to break down some of them, and I wanted to leave a nice runway of time. We're 13, 14 months since the book came out, and I have a nice runway of time now based on my previous books and where it compares and how it either over or underachieved based on my expectations. So a very quick synopsis for those, and I don't want to rehash for those of you who already know the story of books based on other episodes. I released my first book, The Fitness Mindset, my most successful book of all time. Up to date, has sold more than 100,000 copies across different platforms, from audiobook to physical book to Kindle. Rewire Your Mindset was technically my second book that I hybrid published with Rethink Press. The Fitness Mindset and Rewire Your Mindset were both hybrid published through a UK-based publisher. In between those two books, I self-published a GEA book titled Leaner, Stronger, Faster, where you keep the majority of your royalties. You keep 80% with a self-published book, depending on the price. You keep about 60% of a hybrid model. And then a traditional book, The Keen Edge, Mastering the Mindset for Real Lasting Fat Loss, was my most recently published book, which was traditional. And you keep about 10 to 20% of your royalties on that. That's kind of the general split across self-publishing, hybrid publishing, and traditional publishing. I won't go into the differences between the three. I've covered that on previous podcasts on what route you should take when you're thinking about writing a book, or if you should write a book and what routes you could potentially take or paths you could potentially take. So I won't go back over that. But what I will talk about is the pros and cons of traditionally publishing a book. The first con, which is probably the biggest one on this list, and this was a reservation I had before accepting a traditional publishing deal, and it's been largely confirmed, and not because there was anything wrong with my publisher. I was with Guild Publishing in Ireland, and they were great, particularly in the early stages. They have some fantastic people in there. I'm talking traditional publishing as a whole, as an industry. It's so archaic and behind its time, it's barely funny. And if you weren't in the middle of it, and to see it firsthand and see how backwards it is, you wouldn't believe it. And with traditional publishing, the entire system of the distribution, where people are buying the books in traditional stores, the marketing campaigns that tend to go into them, a lot of traditional media where they're not notoriously known for selling books, although they're great for vanity metrics or ego posts and things along those lines, being on radio or television, etc. They actually don't shift book sales for the most part. And long-term listeners of this podcast and those who follow my other podcast, the Brian Keane podcast, you'll know that people on podcasts tend to buy books. A lot of people who listen to professional development shows or personal development shows, in the case of the Brian Keane podcast, are already into the space. And I can comfortably shift potentially a couple of thousand copies of a book from talking to an author on my other podcast, partly because of the numbers that show gets in terms of downloads, but also because of the audience that are listening. It's a captivated reader audience for the most part, either audiobooks or physical books. So an author can come on my show, and if they do it right and they pitch it the right way, they could potentially shift a couple of thousand copies in the space of a couple of weeks, and definitely within the space of the month of the episode airing. And then it has a long tail. A lot of people listen to the back catalogue, so it continually generates leads for that book. When I was working through my campaign for promotion of the traditional book, I was on the radio every second day. And the radio, although a decent medium, is not the same as an in-depth podcast that people have physically gone into to listen to. The radio is kind of casting a wide net, same as mainstream, same as television. It casts a very wide net, and the idea is that a small percentage of people will go, oh, actually, I'm really into that topic, I'll buy that book, as opposed to going straight into the heart of where people are. So influencer marketing on social media, podcast marketing, etc. So with traditional, and I've been on both sides of this with publishers, is where they're the smart ones, from my experience, have podcast campaigns built in. So they're reaching out to those podcasts and getting the promotion on shows that are a good fit for the topic of the book. And with my experience of marketing a traditional book, I thought, wow, we've gone back to the 1990s with this. And again, as I said, it's not a knock on my publisher at all. I thought they were great and really enjoyed working with them. And if I ever traditionally published a book again, I would definitely go with Gill. I thought they were fantastic in terms of the people and communication and talking with them. They were brilliant. But the model of traditional publishing itself is so far behind. And that was a major con. The next thing that I didn't really enjoy was you lose a little bit of control of the book. And this is probably my biggest regret, although not a major regret, because I am happy with how the book came out. It serves the person who it's supposed to serve, that yo-yo diet or person who's struggling with weight loss or fat loss who can't get their mindset right. It hits that person very nailed on. But when you're working with a traditional publisher, you have input all the way through, which can either make or break a book. And there were sections that I added in there that I, in hindsight, wish I was more resilient on saying no to, or held my ground on saying no to. One of the reasons that the Fitness Mindset, my first book, was so successful was I was ruthless in the editing process. I was very much following the Stephen King model of killing your darlings. So if there was something that I was saying in 2 sentences that I could say in 1, I scaled it back. If there was something that didn't contribute or add to the book, I took it out. And I was ruthless. Like, I literally got that book down to, I think, between 20 and 30,000 words. 30,000 words, I think it is. And it was double that length at one point. When I was going down the traditional route, I kept getting ideas added saying, do you need this? You need this, you need this, you need this. And it ends up making this bigger book that isn't necessarily a bad thing, because some people prefer bigger books. But knowing my audience and the success of previous books, I would have kept it shorter in hindsight. I also wanted to make it just a book on mindset, meaning that it was going to be originally titled The Nutrition Mindset. I think The Keen Edge is probably a better title. The publisher came up with that. But I wanted it to be The Nutrition Mindset, which was effectively how you approach nutrition. It would have been 20 to 30,000 words, and it would have been wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, in terms of content. Get your mindset right. I'm not educating you on amino acids or protein. I'm not educating you on sleep and stress. This is how you approach a nutritional plan. And we'll never know. There's no parallel universe where that happened, and I would know if that book had more of an impact on people, or if it would have gone poorer in terms of digestion and readability for people. I'm not sure. But it wasn't necessarily the book I wanted. At the end of the process, I remember looking at the cover going, well, that looks really cool. Looking at the inside of the book and going, I could take or leave this. And that was down to when I originally came up with the draft for the book. I wanted to either make it a short, pitchy, how to approach nutrition and from the mindset side, or I wanted to do a full expanded version of the Fitness Mindset that had photos, that had recipes, etc. at the end, that were all photo based. So copying effectively other bestsellers, looking for what other Sunday Times, New York Times, Amazon bestsellers did, and then copied that model in terms of structure and layout. And I ended up getting this kind of Frankenstein version of both, where I ended up having it look like my other books, which would have been great if I had gone the traditional or the hybrid or self-published route. But because of going with the traditional publisher and thinking this would be easier because they have photographers, they have people who can shoot the food, they can shoot the images, and they can make the graphics look really good, I'm going to go down this route with them. But the book didn't end up going that way, and I didn't really get the full say in that. And although, as I mentioned, my publishers were great and they took my feedback into account, there was definitely a misalignment of expectation versus what the book ended up being. And some people love it, like this is such a subjective thing, but I think I'm probably too close to it because of what I wanted on the front end. Some people look at it, I remember my mum, my dad, my daughter, of course she's only 7, so she doesn't care, she just sees my picture on the cover at a bookshop, and they're like, oh, it looks great, the font is great, the readability is great, and I was like, oh yeah, it is, but it's not what I wanted. And that is definitely on the downside, or the negative side. On the pro side, the distribution is important here. And this is where, if you're putting a heavy pro and putting them in order, the best thing a traditional publisher can give you is the distribution within stores. And this is great, definitely as a vanity metric and as an ego boost. And if only the fact that my daughter, every time Holly walks by Eason's, she pulls people in to show them my book. I love that from a personal standpoint. But if you look at the sales trajectory of online book sales versus offline book sales, they're literally night and day in 2022, 2023. Meaning that most people buy from Amazon or the book station or the book depository or somewhere in the online space. And most traditional bookstores are dying a slow death as a result of that. And although it's great that your book is in stores, and it definitely opens up opportunities, because I got a couple of speaking gigs, corporate speaking gigs in particular, where they quoted the book and said, look, I saw the book in Eason's and was following up with you off the back of it. So I ended up generating really good revenue second hand from the book, although you make decent revenue on the front end, but you're only keeping 10 to 20%. So €1 or €2 per book, you're not going to become a millionaire unless you had a book that sells multiple millions of copies. And I thought about the pros and the cons and was it worth it? And because I got so much speaking gigs and I got a lot of invites to events on my other books, I don't know if the traditional publishing made that much of a difference, if I'm being completely honest. You can also do what I did, and you can go hand-to-hand combat in those bookstores, meaning that when I released the Fitness Mindset and Rewire Your Mindset, I went into Dubray's, I went into Eason's, I went into these stores and said, look, do you want to stock 5 copies, 10 copies, see if they sell? And then they would come back and order more. So I did do that hand-to-hand combat and got them into those stores, but it was just more awkward than having a publisher saying, right, you're getting 100, 200 copies of this book, and they'll put it out there to promote and sell. So there's definitely pros, there's definitely cons. What I would say here is the most important thing, and I'll keep this episode quite short because there isn't really that much of a pro or a con list outside of it. And I think I'm in a good position because I've gone hybrid published with 2 books, the Fitness Mindset, Rewire Your Mindset. I self-published a GEA book, and I've gone traditional. I have all 3 avenues of experience now. And my next book, which I'm currently writing, is a book on mental health and anxiety, is probably going to be self-published or hybrid published in some shape or form. I'm very unlikely going to go traditional publisher with my next book. Maybe down the future. I do think there's a time and a place based on the purpose or goal of the book. If you are in a position now where you want to have that distribution in stores or that looks good in stores factor, yeah, you should 100% pitch traditional publishers and try to get them in on it. I also think if you have a mainstream topic, meaning that you're already in mainstream media, which probably only a small percentage of you are, then going with a book in traditional media makes sense. So for example, if you're a GEA player playing intercounty and you're doing an autobiography, it makes way more sense to go with mainstream publishers because you're in mainstream media. And you have people like 60-year-old men buying books in bookstores because they love GEA or they love the GEA player. Not all of those are going to go on to Amazon. But if you have a niche product or you have something that's specific, organic fitness, marketing to personal trainers, general IBS, nutrition, things along these lines that are a little bit more niche and targeted, I'd recommend you look into either hybrid or self-publishing that book. Partly because you'll have full control of the content, which means that you'll live or die on your sword, which is always a good thing. You'll make more money on it because the royalties would be higher, closer to 60% per sale than 10 to 20%, or up to 80% if you're self-publishing. And you'll be able to do and have control of that book. So if you want to give it away for free and then bring people into the top of your funnel because you're selling a coaching program or a course at the back of it, you can do that. Whereas you can't do it with a traditional book. You don't have that pricing control. You don't have the model control. So something that I haven't done, but you could potentially do, is take your books, give it away for free, and have your funnel, the top of your sales funnel, that brings people in. They get your book for free, and then you set up an email campaign or some form of campaign that follows up with them, and then you sell them into your 2, 3, 4, 5, 900, 1,000 euro or £1,000 course. And now that book that potentially would have sold for €10 or £12 potentially is selling for €500 or £1,000. So you have all these opportunities and all these potential ways to monetize it differently than if you just went traditional. And also there's more gatekeepers with traditional. I was introduced by a mutual friend, Trisha Lewis, has been on my podcast several times, Trisha's Transformation. She introduced me to Gil, having done her first book with them as well, and it opened the door. So there's a little bit of gatekeepers when it comes to traditional publishing. But to be honest, in this day and age, and for the majority of you listening, I wouldn't be going this route unless you are somebody, as I mentioned, in that mainstream media already, and your avatar for the book is 50, 60 plus year olds, people who still frequent bookstores to buy all of their books, versus 25, 30-year-olds who buy most of it on Amazon or Book Depository, then I would just veer away from it. And again, this is all opinion, anecdote, experience. I might do a podcast in 2 years' time and completely flipped my opinion on it based on more information. But from the last 13 months of experience, and although that book has sold very well, The Keen Edge, the downsides have been massively outweighed by the upsides. I thought when I did it first, and my main goal for releasing a traditional published book was to open doors on shows, TV, podcasts, etc., that I couldn't open prior, and that didn't happen. There was a disconnect from that marketing side. So it didn't matter how well the book did, it didn't serve its purpose for what I wanted and it didn't come out the way I wanted in the end. But again, failure is feedback. As I said multiple times, it's not a knock on my publisher, or anyone else out there might have great experiences with their publisher as well. It's on the system as a whole that I think is very broken, very outdated, and very archaic. And I would be very surprised if in 5 or 10 years it's still around, or at least around in the capacity that it is now. A lot of smaller publishers have been soaked up, and there'll probably just be 4 or 5 big boys in several years' time still doing it. And I would imagine they'll be a little bit more nimble, moving away from the trial and tested mainstream media, casting a wide net, trying to market a book, as opposed to going very targeted and specific into a niche to try and get those sales up so that you can grow as an author, have more impact with people, which is ultimately what a book is about, or grow your business by increasing revenue or more leads, again, depending on your goal for writing the book. So hopefully this helped. As I said, it's a bit of a press record and talk based on my experience, but if you are in that process now, or it's something you're thinking about, there's some food for thought. So hopefully that helps. That's everything from today's episode. Catch you all real soon.